Hello, today we'll be reviewing Joshua chapter 2 for our Sunday school lesson. We are on the precipice of crossing the Jordan River, which we will get to in chapter 3. But this is the account of Joshua sending spies across the Jordan and over into Jericho to spy out the land and to get a report on the strength perhaps of the people, the strengths of the cities, and whatnot. And so we read here in Joshua chapter 2 about these two spies. If you recall, Joshua was part of the 12 spies that Moses had sent in to Canaan back in Numbers chapter 14. Him and Caleb were the only two of the 12 spies to come back with a good report and an encouraging report that they could, in fact, take the Canaan land. Obviously, the unbelief of the people there led to them wandering around for another 39 years. But we see here Joshua secretly sending two spies into the camp in order to get a report on what they will be facing once they come into Jericho. In chapter 6 is when they actually get to Jericho. They cross the Jordan in chapter 3. But we see here, the spies were sent by Joshua into Jericho. They come across, they meet up, or they come to the house of a harlot named Rahab. Rahab lived on the city wall on the eastern side of Jericho, which was where the spies would be coming from the east. And it wouldn't be odd for visitors of the city to be at the harlot's house, and so perhaps that's why they went to Rahab's house, because they would be inconspicuous. But word gets out that their spies from Israel come into the land, and Jericho had heard about the mighty exploits that had happened with the Hebrews. It mentions in verse 10, Rahab talks to the spies and mentions in verse 10 how they had heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea. Keep in mind that was 40 years ago, and still that was something that was on the minds of these people that lived in Jericho. They had heard and remembered what God had did for the Hebrews against the kings of the Amorites, which that would have been in the past, perhaps the past year. So that was more recent news. But the people of Jericho had heard how God had taken care of the Hebrews up to this point, and now they are believing that they are going to be the next city that is overcome by the Hebrews. But we see here that there's a conversation between Rahab and the spies in verse, where was it at here? We see in verse 12 that Rahab asks for mercy from the Hebrews, that when they come, that her and her family would be spared. And so the men tell her to tie a scarlet thread in the window of her house, and so when they come, they will know that is where Rahab and her family live. And they say there in verse 18 to tie a scarlet thread in the window, that they would know where she lived. And so she did that. Rahab and her family will be spared once the Hebrews come into the land. We read about Rahab and her great faith in sparing the spies. We read about her in Matthew 1:25. We read about her in Hebrews 11:31, and also James chapter 2 verse 25. How Rahab's faith is commended, and her belief in the Lord. And actually, Rahab ends up marrying a Hebrew, and through Rahab, we have the birth of Christ, Rahab being in the lineage of Christ. You can read about that in Matthew chapter 1, verse 25. And so Rahab here was blessed because of her faith, because of her work in sparing the spies that had came from the Hebrews to spy out the land. So we see here great faith in Rahab. We see here the fear of those of Jericho. There's a lot more in this chapter than I will cover in this brief overview. But we see here basically the faith of Rahab in the God of the Hebrews. Rahab recognizing that God is sovereign and that God is the creator and that God is the one that has taken the Hebrews this far. And as we see here by reading the verses in the New Testament that I've mentioned, Rahab's faith is greatly rewarded. Thank you for watching this review of Joshua chapter 2.